Rush, I think, made this announcement at 2:45 yesterday, and by 2:48, it was everywhere.
Top trend on Twitter.
Everywhere.
It was, I've been doing this podcast in the middle of the night with Senator Cruz, so if I can get an hour of sleep here or there, I try to do it. I had just laid down to go to sleep. 5 minutes later, my wife wakes me up because the news was that earth-shattering. She had to tell me, Rush Limbaugh has made this announcement. And I thought his statement that he made on his radio show was really beautiful because he got all the hate that you would expect from the usual suspects on the left.
Horrible.
Not just random accounts, but the blue check marks and the people who have been on CNN saying really vile, awful things. And Rush had this amazing line in his statement. He said, I don't proselytize. I don't talk about it much, but I've got a personal relationship with God, and I'm leaning on that personal relationship now a lot. But it's very important to me. And it actually gave me, as a listener, as a longtime Rush admirer, a lot of comfort because I thought, no one here gets out alive. Rush Limbaugh has led a pioneering, unbelievable life. Everyone's rooting for him. Everybody's praying for him. But he has lived really a magnificent life. The people who need our prayers more are probably the ones who are cheering on this news on Twitter with the blue check marks, who are saying vile, terrible things. They're the ones.
Oh, shut up.
Is
that the way you feel when I say something Gandhi-like?
Just stop it, Michael. I mean, it's just, because you don't see, when you listen to Rush, right, he talks about talent on loan from God, half his brain tied behind his back. But he said in the statement, he said, when I talk about myself, it's satirical, right? He's the guy who's just delivering the news, telling you the truth, and there's a reason it was the top trend of news all day yesterday. I mean, he is the man, and
he is not that guy.
He's not the big ego guy.
He's not. He is shockingly, I think, almost unaware of how big he is. You know what I'm talking about?
It's hard to not know when the checks come in.
No, but there's a difference between checks and just believing your own hype. And I think he doesn't believe his own hype, and I don't think he questions any hype or any truth about him.
And the other thing is that these people who are saying terrible things, not one of them has ever listened to the Rush Limbaugh show. Yeah. Not one of them has listened to more than the 2-minute sound bites that some awful left-wing operative sends out. Right. And if they listened, maybe they would learn something.
Right. So how old are you?
I am 12 years old is what people tell me.
But
I am 29, about to turn 30.
29. So what is your relationship with Rush? First, I mean,
Rush is I also have a personal relationship with God, so I won't call him that high. But he is definitely a lower deity or something. I mean, he's just the guy that you grow up with as he is. He's the guy. He is conservative broadcasting. I mean, I've been a longtime fan of yours since I was a kid as well. And Mark Levin and other people. But Rush was the first. He was the man who invented the whole industry. Yeah. And so the idea
he's the guy who saved. I'm a radio guy.
Right.
He's the guy who saved the AM radio ban.
Right.
If Rush Limbaugh just was removed from the scenario, there would be no AM radio anymore.
Right. And so you wonder, as somebody who grew up, like I have not lived in a world where Rush Limbaugh was not dominating the news, dominating conservative talk. The idea that could be shaken, it's impossible to believe.
What were your thoughts yesterday, Stu?
I mean, Rush Limbaugh is at least partially responsible for me being a conservative. I mean, I think I may have wound up that way. My, parents were but they weren't really political. Yeah. I don't know where I would have wound up, but I remember after high school listening to Rush, and I just remember him having the answer for everything. All these things you'd hear on mainstream media and all of these arguments that you'd hear from the left, which I was barely acquainted with at the time, but every single time one of those would come up and you'd think, it's like Law and Order, when like the first attorney goes, you're like, oh, that guy definitely murdered him. And then the defense person goes, there's no way murder, he's all set up. You go back and forth depending on what argument you're hearing. That's how you are in your formative years. Right. And, it wasn't like that with Rush because they never had answers for what he said. You know,
they never attempted.
They didn't even
to
try
answer.
it. Yeah, and they ignored him to their own
Demise.
massive demise.
And they talked badly about talk radio, et cetera, and then they tried it, and none of them could ever succeed.
Oh, remember those efforts?
Yeah.
Those cute little efforts at left-wing talk radio?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
those were
it's
fun
kind of
times.
like, it's nice because it's kind of like they look at us like, oh, look at that cute little Christian movie. Oh, they're out there making another movie.
Yeah.
Isn't that neat?
And, you know, the great testament, of course, the reason they hated him so much is he was just so damn effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you see that. I mean, this is conservative media does really well when it comes to open markets. As we just said, you know, Ted Cruz and Michael Knowles, the #1 podcast in America with The Verdict. I mean, like, when there is an open open rules, free market, you see conservative stuff rises to the top often. It's when it's like the studio system and it's a lot harder to get things made. But that is even turning around now with technology and capitalism.
So he is also a, you know, like I look at Steve Jobs, and I think here's a guy who got out of college because he knew. Rush is a guy who I don't know if he chose or just couldn't afford. I was a guy who couldn't afford college until I was 30. I had to pay for it myself. Rush was also a disc jockey. And he's always hammered by the left for those two things. But those two things made him effective. He's a good entertainer. To be a disc jockey, at least in the old days, you had to be smart and you had to be able to think on your feet and move quickly, which nobody in television has that. Nobody, and they can't teach that. The other thing is that because he wasn't taught what to think, he thinks differently.
Right. You know, there's this line, we were talking about Gandhi-esque statements before. Yeah. There's this line from Chesterton said, the angels can fly because they can take themselves lightly. There's nothing dignified about boring your audience to death. Yeah. And you talk about the fusion of entertainment and enlightenment. If you can bring these ideas to life out of this rigid, desiccated university structure, that's a wonderful thing. And obviously it has a major cultural impact.